George, his girlfriend Phoebe, and their friends Ben and Chloe were seasoned campers, using every spare weekend since getting their licenses to escape to the wilderness. Their current trip was an ambitious backpacking trek in the Peak District, hoping to find secluded spots near small, cascading waterfalls. For protection, George's father had lent them a small handgun, which George kept secured in his tent. The first day passed well, spent hiking to a minor cascade. However, during the descent, Chloe kept whispering that she felt eyes on them. Eventually, she pointed. They all saw him, a man, unsettlingly still and observing them from behind a clump of ferns. When Ben yelled a bravado-filled challenge, the man quickly slipped away. An hour later, while searching for a camping spot, George spotted a freakishly tall, unnaturally lanky woman staring at them from a distance. The group, already spooked, yelled at her, mentioning they were armed. She merely turned and walked into the thicker brush. They debated whether the two weirdos were connected, ultimately deciding to hike another hour to put distance between themselves and the unsettling figures. They found a lovely spot by a small, shallow creek with a perfect pool for a quick dip. The initial fear faded as they cooked a lavish dinner of grilled chicken breast and potatoes, an attempt to bring back some normality. Later, fueled by alcohol and merriment, they shared stories and laughed well into the night. It was a perfect, convivial evening that made the daytime encounters feel like a distant joke. The shift came dramatically after they retired. George and Phoebe were settling into their tent when they heard it. A single, echoing burst of loud, unnerving laughter right outside their canvas walls. "Was that you, Ben?" George called out, assuming their intoxicated friend was playing a prank. "That wasn't me," Ben's voice shot back, immediately sobering everyone. The hair rose on George's neck. He grabbed the gun, unzipped the tent flap, and fired 3 quick shots into the air, screaming a warning for the unseen person to leave immediately. The sound of rapid footsteps crunching through the undergrowth provided the only answer. They huddled their tents together, agreeing to take shifts as lookouts for the rest of the tense night. The next morning, the mood was heavy. They decided to cut the trip short and camp closer to the trail exit for one final night, planning to leave first thing. They packed quickly and hiked out. During a brief stop for lunch, George noted something worrying. In all the hours they had hiked, they hadn't seen a single other person, despite the crowded car park they had left days before. They set up camp only 3 miles from the exit, trying to maintain a semblance of a normal last night. They ate, drank a little less, and retreated to their tents early. George, waking in the absolute black of midnight needing the loo, decided paranoia was prudence and took the handgun with him. As he finished and turned on his headlamp, the beam caught movement. Standing a short distance away was a man, the same one Chloe had spotted the day before. Long, dirty black hair, alarmingly lanky, and now clearly visible in the light. And he was holding a machete. George froze, his heart hammering against his ribs, before screaming and raising the gun. The man, without a word, started charging. Acting purely on instinct and terror, George pulled the trigger repeatedly, emptying the magazine. He heard a sharp, pain-filled yell and saw the figure drop. Immediately, George rushed back to wake the others. "Pack up. Now. We have to go." The thought of involving the authorities was instantly dismissed. George feared being charged with a crime, and honestly, he felt the man's life wasn't worth the risk of their own freedom. They abandoned the tents entirely. There was no time. Grabbing only their rucksacks, they ran the final 3 miles, pushing through their exhaustion until they reached the safety of the car park. Huddled inside the locked car for the rest of the night, they drove away at dawn, stopping only once they reached a town far away. To this day, the group is conflicted. They never called the police, and no reports of the incident ever surfaced. They often wonder if they were attacked by deranged locals or something worse, and whether the crazed psychopaths who hunted them are still out there, waiting for the next group of foolish young hikers. Alistair, a seasoned trekker with a preference for solitary journeys, had spent the last 6 years cultivating an easy confidence in the wilds. This autumn, he traveled to a quiet stretch of the Scottish Highlands, seeking true solitude away from the popular footpaths. The weather was a classic, brooding Scottish day, cool, overcast, and still. He was several hours into his unmarked route when the ground gave way to a dramatic gorge. It wasn't a world-famous chasm, but it was deep enough, perhaps 12 meters down to the stony bottom where a small, frigid burn flowed. A massive, ancient oak tree, felled by a past storm, lay wedged between the two banks, forming a natural, if terrifying, bridge. The bark was smooth, hinting that others had used it before. After a careful inspection, Alistair decided it was sturdy enough. He shed his rucksack and took his time crossing, focusing entirely on the worn wood beneath his boots, enjoying the sharp, exhilarating rush of adrenaline when he finally stepped onto solid ground on the opposite side. The relief was immediately shattered by a rhythmic, heavy thunk-thunk-thunk sound from behind him. He spun round. Standing on the far bank, barely 3 meters from where the oak tree met the earth, was a man. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, draped in a tatty, faded camo jacket and grubby trousers. A scraggly, gray beard gave him the look of a caricature woodsman. In his hands was a full-sized woodcutter's axe. Before Alistair could utter a sound, the man, whom Alistair later internally named Old Man Fergus, walked directly to the base of the log bridge and started swinging. Alistair's confusion instantly turned to a cold, panicked terror. "Oi! What the hell are you doing?" Alistair yelled across the divide. Fergus didn't even lift his head, just kept up the brutal, methodical strikes. Then one swing landed deeper than the rest, and the entire structure shifted. Alistair shouted louder, his voice raw. "I just crossed that. Stop it." It was then the horrifying realization dawned. Fergus knew he had just crossed. He wasn't destroying the bridge for safety. He was trying to strand Alistair. Finally, after a moment of desperate fury and a stream of useless insults from Alistair, Fergus stopped swinging, planted the axe in the dirt, and finally looked up. His face was grim, his eyes dark and sunken into his skull. He leaned over the edge of the gorge and spoke in a flat, casual tone, as if discussing the price of milk. "That's not my problem." Alistair was momentarily speechless, the indifference in the man's voice infuriating him more than the threat. Losing all composure, he began screaming insults, regretting his lack of control the instant the words left his mouth. Fergus straightened up, took a step closer, and stated with unnerving certainty, "I know these woods a lot better than you do." The phrase wasn't a threat of violence, but a chilling statement of fact, a declaration of ownership over the territory and the power within it. Fergus then picked up his axe and walked back into the trees without another glance. Alistair was left alone with the now visibly splintered and cracked bridge. The log was unstable. Crossing back was suicide. With his phone showing no signal, he decided to cut his trip short, turning downstream in a desperate search for an alternative crossing, convinced the gorge would eventually narrow. Didn't. The ravine only seemed to deepen and the gap widen. Panic was setting in as the light began to fade. Just as he started considering the lunatic idea of climbing down and out, he stumbled upon a small clearing. It held what looked like a neglected camp, but everything about it felt wrong. Trees were scored with deep, meaningless gouges and symbols, and scattered on the ground were bits of rusted metal and what looked sickeningly like animal bones arranged in patterns. It was a site of dark ritual, and he immediately fled. Minutes later, he heard the sounds. Light, measured footfalls behind him. He looked over his shoulder and caught sight of a figure ducking behind a tree. Then another to his left. He was being herded. No longer caring about stealth, the figures began to move openly, one holding what looked like a pipe or heavy club. Alistair ran, the panic turning to pure survival instinct. The chase became a terrifying symphony of his own ragged breath and a horrific, high-pitched screaming war cry from one of his pursuers. Exhausted, with the gorge still on his left, he saw a second, smaller fallen tree spanning the gap. He launched himself across without a moment's thought. As he reached the other side, he turned. There were 3 figures, all resembling the first Old Man Fergus, filthy and menacing. The one with the pipe simply looked at him. Then, a chilling voice called out, "You've got lucky. Now get thee out of here." Alistair did exactly as he was told, running until the silent, dark forest gave way to the blessed familiarity of the trailhead. Though months have passed, the mountains no longer hold the same appeal. The unsettling certainty in Fergus's voice haunts every solitary moment he spends outdoors. Eleanor always believed that true beauty lay not in the landscapes people admired, but in the untouched wildness that required effort to find. This passion often led her far off the beaten track. On this particular day, she was deep within a remote stretch of woodland in Cornwall, several hours' walk from any marked path. The density of the trees was disorienting, and after attempting to follow a vague deer trail for too long, she realized the sick, heavy feeling in her stomach. She was well and truly lost. The sun was still high, offering no immediate danger, but the landscape refused to yield anything familiar. As she tried to orient herself using the dwindling light, a subtle rustling sound started behind her. It wasn't constant, but intermittent. A deliberate, careful movement that ceased the moment she stopped walking. She tried to rationalize it. A badger, a fox, perhaps a deer. But the movements lacked the randomness of wildlife. They were too matched to her own pace. Eleanor had spent enough time outdoors to know that whatever was behind her was stalking her, not merely passing by. The suspense lasted for what felt like an age, tightening the knot of fear in her chest. Then, all at once, the rustling turned into crashing movement from multiple directions. Her worst-case scenario had arrived. She was surrounded. 6 or 7 pairs of feral eyes stared back at her from the gloom. A pack of wild dogs, some snarling, others just fixed on her with unnerving stillness. She pulled out the small knife she carried, knowing the fight was hopeless, but refusing to simply become a meal. This is it, she thought, the absurdity of her death in a beautiful, remote location crashing over her. Then every single dog went rigid. Their attention snapped, ears pinned back, all staring in the same direction, over Eleanor's shoulder. They weren't reacting to her. They were reacting to something else. A heartbeat later, the entire pack scattered, sprinting away as if they were the prey. Eleanor was left alone, but the silence that followed was worse than the snarling. The woods had become utterly mute. No birdsong, no buzzing insects, no wind sighing through the canopy. It was as if someone had pulled a plug on the world's soundtrack. The light, though still present, felt strangely dimmer, like looking through a fog. Her adrenaline began to give way to an unnerving dread. What could frighten an entire pack of desperate wild dogs into a full-scale rout? Against her better judgment, She pressed on in the direction she believed to be correct, the same direction the dogs had fled from. After a heart-pounding 20 minutes, she reached a clearing. It was not a campsite, but a place of unsettling purpose. The surrounding trees were scored with deep, geometric carvings, symbols she did not recognize. Hanging from the lower branches on brittle leather cords were objects. Small, bleached bones, and pieces of metal that had been twisted and rusted into impossible, jagged shapes. In the center, the fire pit was not a simple ring, but a small, carefully structured tower of stones, filled with scraps of cloth and broken, unidentified objects. But the most terrifying thing was the smoke. A cloud of thick, black vapor hung 6 feet above the stones, absolutely motionless. It wasn't drifting or dissipating, and it didn't look like it was rising from the fire pit. It was just there, solid and defying physics. Eleanor found herself frozen, staring at the unnatural blackness. A deeply unsettling feeling began to rise in her chest. A profound grief mixed with pure terror, as if her body was anticipating a loss that hadn't yet occurred. She felt disconnected, as though she were viewing the scene through a distant window. After 5 long minutes fixed on the non-moving smoke, her survival instinct finally screamed louder than her dread. She turned and ran blindly, her memory of the next hour becoming inexplicably foggy. She remembered a desperate, all-out sprint, the feeling that something was trying to hold her back, and then, suddenly, the freezing chill of sweat as she stumbled out of the woods and found her car in the growing darkness. The incident, and especially the selective memory loss that followed, became an inexplicable scar on her life. A terrifying encounter that suggested the things she ran from in the woods were perhaps not entirely physical.